Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our Aging Infrastructure webinar, Knowing What's at Stake. My name is Matt Martin with Reserve Advisors. I'm going to be moderating today's presentation as well as the Q&A to follow. Before we get started, I do have a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, we're going to be recording today's webinar, and we'll be sending an email out to all registrants later this afternoon with that recording. Second, we do have a pretty large audience today, so we're going to utilize Zoom's Q&A functionality to manage any questions that you might have and address those. So you will see in Zoom, there should be several icons. One is Q&A. You can click on that and you can drop your questions there throughout the presentation. We'll be sure that we address those for you. Today we have with us Dan Miske, partner at Husch Blackwell. Dan and his team at Husch Blackwell represent condominium and homeowners associations throughout the United States on a variety of issues. We're also going to be joined by Andrew Stoutenberg and Matt Queasley, Regional Executive Directors at Reserve Advisors. Collectively, Matt and Andrew have been serving community associations with reserve studies for 30 years. They'll be available to answer some questions as well following our presentation. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and launch a Q&A poll, and then we'll turn things over to Dan. So Dan, Andrew, it looks like about 60% of attendees are currently concerned with some structural issues regarding their buildings. And it looks like also about 50% have had a reserve study within the last year. With that, Dan, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you so you can start the presentation.
I'm trying to get it so that you can see my face and actually I can read my screen. So we'll pick between the two, but welcome everybody. Nice to meet all of you. I am an attorney who specializes in this area of law. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about myself, but rather get to the aging buildings, what you need to know. So I will be sneaking some views at it, but the four basic areas, and of course, come on, there we go. The four basic areas to this section is understanding your buildings, board liability, insurance, and practical steps for your board and association to take. We will be covering all of those relatively lightly, but the concepts will all be there. And if you need a deeper dive into any of them, I'm sure you could contact any of the panelists here. So starting with understanding your buildings. The basic concept is you buy into a condo or you're on the board of a condominium association or homeowners association or any other association, and you go, we got buildings. Who knew? The buildings are interesting, but the problem is you didn't build them. You probably don't have the plans, although you might. You probably don't have as-built plans, so you probably have what was actually initially designed. And what you have is a need for somebody to actually look at it. So what's the way to do that? Obviously, it's a reserve study. This is not a commercial. I was not hired by Reserve Advisors to recommend reserve studies. I'm simply telling you this is the process that I recommend to every one of the associations that we represent as to how you get to what do I have. So reserve study, what is it? It's a non-destructive review of the condition of your property. And the initial step is, do you have one? And if not, why not? And I've never heard a good answer to if not, why not? Because you need it as a board member or a manager to reach rational conclusions as to what you need to do or not need to do relative to your buildings. So moving along, still under understanding your building, the analysis of your reserve study. Take the time as a board to review it. And that sounds crazy, but I know of so many boards that get them and go, oh, here's what it says, here's the funding we need, okay. No, actually read it and then spend some time thinking about what it's really telling you. Are your reserves adequately funded? Does it disclose defects? If it does disclose possible defects, which is often the case, what are you doing to figure out, are these defects structural in nature? Are they significant in nature? Are they latent or hidden or didn't disclose themselves when you would have initially inspected the building? And why is that relevant? It's relevant to every association because all of you are going to be subject to various laws relative to how long you can potentially go after the developer, can potentially go after the builders, potentially go after the engineers, architects, whoever else we're talking about. There will be statute of limitations and statutes of repose. All I'm really saying is, end of the day, there are limits as to when you can go back after people, and knowing what the condition of your building is sooner rather than later is your best choice. So still under understanding your building. If you have defects that are noted, then what? The answers become somewhat easy from the standpoint of, you want to know if you have structural problems. I know the Surfside case is an easy case, but there are cases around the country of structural problems that are looked at and go, yeah, you got a significant problem. Oh, that's each of your units is worth X. Make it easy on me and say $100,000. Each unit's worth $100,000. And oh, by the way, we only have 20 units and we've got $2 million worth of damages. You've kind of used up the full value of your property in making these repairs. You have to sort of analyze, what are our options? Can we extend the life? This requires often some sort of destructive testing. So that's why I talked about it. Determine with whoever your attorney is there a means to collect from some third party, whether that's an insurance company, whether that's someone who built it, whether that's the developer, whether there were sufficient reserves. All of those will be questions that will arise, but the answers will change based on who it is that's asking and in what state you're located. Obviously, determine if there's any insurance. Insurance generally relates to an occurrence, so bad maintenance isn't an occurrence. And then you get down to, do you need maintenance, repair, or replacement? And that goes, once again, back to the reserve study. So the thing a lot of you are probably hooked into, yeah, but what's my liability? Do I have any risk? And certainly it's possible. If you do nothing, you're going to have some risk, since you obviously have ongoing fiduciary duties to your association and to each of the board members. And into each of the unit owners. And I say that knowing that probably some states say that your fiduciary duty is only to the association. And some states say that your fiduciary duty is to both the association and your unit owners. But the liability usually arises because of one of four things. And this is generic, but the concept remains fairly constant. A willful failure to deal fairly with your association, a violation of criminal law, improper personal profit or benefit, or willful misconduct. I know they sound a lot alike. I know they all mention, or a lot of them mention willful. It generically, board members are fairly protected. If you don't do something that's pretty self-obvious, don't pay yourself, don't pay your company, don't pay your friend's company, don't pay relatives of you money. You create problems for yourself by taking those actions that are potentially a problem. Don't just fix your unit and magically all the other units have a problem and then you sell your unit. You are asking for problems that you don't need to have. So board liability, what can you do to protect yourself? And the answer, honestly, is fairly simple. I stole the Wisconsin statute, but most states have similar statutes that deal with, and I hate to read slides, but I'm sort of stuck with this one, but you'll like what it says. It says, unless a director or officer has knowledge that makes reliance unwarranted, a director or officer, obviously I skipped words, may rely on information, opinions, reports, or statements, formal or informal, if prepared or presented by one of the following. And then officers and employees, if they have a good faith reason to believe they know what they're doing. So if you have an accountant, CPA accountant, acting as your treasurer, and they're giving you financial statements, you can rely on those financial statements. Similarly, I'm going to the next one. If you have other professionals or experts that you're hiring, so whether that's a reserve person, whether that's engineers, whether that's an attorney, whether that's insurance experts, whoever it is in whatever area you're talking about, you can legitimately rely on their opinions, because you'll notice the word other persons is bolded. I did that. The statute didn't do that. As long as you have reason to believe the person has professional or expert competence. So at the end, I simply say, this would sure seem to include your reserve studies or reserve companies. Now think about it. You get your reserve report and you don't put away the money they're recommending you put away. It's hard to say you completely relied on their expert advice if you didn't put the money in that they told you to put in to make the repairs they told you need to make. So you can't be partially in. This is not, I put a toe in the water to see, and I didn't like what the reserve study said, so I funded it 40%. We can talk about lots of issues, but that's kind of where you go. So the next issue that we talked about was, or from my 4 points in the beginning, insurance. So unlikely to recover most reserve study issues. Why? Because the reserve study is normally identifying the rate at which properly constructed buildings would deteriorate in whatever market you happen to be in. I'm sure I didn't say that nearly as well as the reserve people can, but the concept is still there. Yes, your roof isn't going to last forever. Yes, your asphalt isn't going to last forever. Yes, your siding isn't going to last forever. You need to do certain things to maintain them to increase the length of life, and then you're going to need to have a fund to replace them. I think we all know that. But knowing it and making sure your assessments are sufficient so the funds are there is a different issue. Okay, insurance, I already talked about it. Generally, if you're trying to recover from insurance, you'll need an occurrence. I've listed a couple here: hail, snowstorm, fire, something else, not poor maintenance. But I get down to my basic answer when people ask me, should I submit this to my insurer? I go, why not? If it's a significant loss, why not submit it and get an answer? At least make them tell you why in writing it's covered or not covered, because you might be surprised. You might not be. How many people here have read insurance policies? Probably not a lot of us have read the whole thing. And by the way, they're not the easiest document to read because it generally says, well, we insure everything except for the things that we don't insure, and we're going to exclude these following items. You got to figure out how to figure out what we're excluding, except for we'll add back certain items, which you then add back. So that's generally how they're all written. So it's a back and forth game. It takes a while to figure out what they're really saying. So practical steps, because I want to make sure we get to where you're really at and what you're really going to take advantage of. And I notice I've gone really quick because I was trying to make sure I got through my slides and didn't skip stuff that I thought you needed to know. So on the practical steps, we're going to sort of take these one by one and make sure you understand why and when. So get a reserve study. So when should you do that? Here's the answer. Unless you have one in the last 5 years. Now, some people say 4 years, some people say 3 years. So I don't have the magic answer to the timing. But when should you get it if you don't have one? Now, yesterday, the day before. The answer is going to stay the same because it's a management tool. It's a tool your board should be using. And I printed something else off here that got it right in front of me, of items you can learn from reserve studies, but the concept stays the same, which is you need it to properly manage your association. By having it, you know the funds, or at least believe you have a very good idea of the funds needed to make the repairs necessary. So if you don't have one, get one. If you do have one and it's old, get it updated. If issues, hire an appropriate expert. I can't tell you what expert because I don't know what the issue are, but you know on your board what your issues are. And it's really that simple. We're having roofing problems. You might be. You might think you're having roofing problems because you're having water problems, but the water problems might be condensation problems. The condensation problems might be coming through the walls, but leaking to the ceilings and therefore leaking down. You might be. So contacting a roofing contractor might be the right approach, but it also might be hire an engineer that'll tell you what the real problem is, or an exterior engineer, or one who literally deals with this all the time. So you can figure out why you're having these problems and what you got to do to fix it, if you can fix it right now. Because it may be your answer to fix it is you're going to have to replace the roof and add some vents and whatever the and are. At the end of the day, that may be, but you don't have to do that for 5 years, but you do have to take some other steps to accomplish this appropriately. What I'm really saying is if you hire the right expert, you will get the right advice so that your board can rely on it in order to take the steps they're recommending. So how is that presented to unit owners? Because unit owners never want to hear, by the way, our assessments are going up. No one ever celebrates that. No one ever goes, God, am I glad this board took a solid look at this so they could raise our assessment so we would have the money. The approach that I have found that works best, nothing's perfect, is to have whoever that expert is come and explain both the risks and rewards of taking or not taking the steps they're recommending. They should be able to do that in a relatively short PowerPoint presentation to your unit owners. So the unit owners aren't shocked by the board doing something, because then the board can put it back on the unit owners and explain to them, we've had a problem. We've had a problem, but not this year. We've had a problem for 10 years. We just haven't addressed the problem. Now we are going to be required to address the problem. So we have two choices. We can continue the way we are, being blind to the fact that we have this problem or pretending we're blind to it. And in 5 years, you're going to get a special assessment. It's going to be a whole bunch of money. But oh, by the way, all of you now need to disclose this to any potential purchaser, which will cost you far more money disclosing it than it will be to simply fix it. Or we can start setting aside our reserves and following the advice our experts have provided to us, and therefore having the funds available when we reach that point in time, even if it requires special assessments in the meantime. Another word no one likes to hear, but you may as well just get it out there. Your unit owners, if they're properly educated, will understand that your units are worth more fixed than they are not fixed, but having to disclose that they need to be fixed. Because if you're a realtor or you're someone in that industry and somebody tells you, oh, I know we need a roof and the roof will only cost $20,000. And you go, no, I kind of have gotten bids and they really cost more like $30,000. And oh, by the way, since we're withholding $30,000, we're going to escrow $45,000 because we want to make sure that whatever we say, we're going to allocate and have available. In other words, your buyers are going to pay you less than they would have paid you had you just fixed it. Next, involve your attorney so you don't give up any rights you might have. Sounds like I'm selling myself. I guess I am. But my basic answer is those rights go away in a hurry. If you've waited 10 years, then I'm going to tell you, you don't have to hire an attorney because they can't help you, probably. I would still tell you to hire an attorney, but now you've given up any possible rights you would have had. The sources of recovery are not that numerous. If somebody regularly deals in this area, they should be able to sit down with you and within an hour, maybe two, analyze what you're presenting, analyze what you have, and tell you if you have any chance, some chance, but they need to read the insurance documents, or pretty much no chance. So next is get fully funded or have a plan to get fully funded. Some people view fully funded as 90%. I view fully funded as 100%. I don't think it's that hard. Your numbers are self-explanatory. The reserve company gives them to you. They're on the piece of paper. Get there. If you happen to have some piece, some aspect of your reserve study that lasts longer, you allocated your roof for 5 years, but hey, it lasts 8. Great. You have extra money. That's not going to hurt you in the long run. Then the last one was follow the reserve study and keep it up to date. We've already talked about it. We already talked about it initially as to when to do it. Use it as a management tool. So what do you do with your aging infrastructure? You'll notice I talked nothing about buildings because I don't know about buildings. What I know about is I know about the problems that arise when buildings are not taken care of. And when you reach that point, you have lots of problems. and you have lots of people who want to blame each other, and you have everybody who wants to say, go get the insurance, but insurance doesn't cover it. You are so much better off with aging infrastructure, setting aside the funds that are going to be needed to fix it, and then fixing it. That's your best option after having talked to the experts that I said, to make sure you don't have a means of recovery that doesn't cost you money. All right. At that point, for me, it's up to questions. I don't see any, but it could be I'm just slow at reading over on the chat part. Or if Andrew or Matthew have more, I know we're only at 22 minutes, and I think we promised 30, but oh well.
Yeah, we've got a handful here, Dan. Going back to the beginning of the presentation, we were talking about defects through the lens of being a newer property. The longer you wait, the less chance you have of recovery. One of the questions was, what about a building that's 100 years old?
Well, if the building's 100 years old, you're not going to recover from the original construction, people. Let's just start there. So was the development, though, within the last 100? I doubt the condo is 100 years old, but if it's an association, I doubt that's 100 years old. The answer is likely going to be very unlikely you're going to go back after the developer. But there's 100-year-old buildings that were developed into whatever they were developed into within the last 5 years. And you go, there you might have something, because the developer would have been expected to do a structural analysis, to look at the building, to build it according to the standards of the industry, even if you're converting a historical building, so that it's one, safe, and two, sufficiently funded, at least initially.
Good, thank you. We talked about the reserve study being a non-invasive visual inspection. What's the difference between that and destructive testing? Or what is destructive testing?
I could let you guys handle this, or I can handle it, but here's the short. Andrew, if you want to jump in on this one, that's fine.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, staying high level, destructive means you're in essence peeling something back. So we'll talk about, let's say, a roof. A reserve study, we're going to visually assess the roof. A invasive or destructive testing is you're getting up on the roof, you're actually going to peel back some shingles so you can see the underlayment, you can see the sheathing. Or maybe if you have a stucco building, again, a reserve study is just visually assessing it. If we see cracks or delamination, we would identify that. But the invasive or destructive testing would be, physically removing small sections to look behind. So you're actually having to damage in a very, very small and controlled setting, a part of a facade or an element. So that's what destructive testing would be.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Regarding the reserve study process, this would be another one for you, Andrew. Who should be the point person for the association during the reserve study process? Board treasurer, general manager, building engineer, facility manager? What is considered a best practice?
Yeah, it's hard to say a best practice. So, we do thousands of these a year, and we have meetings with all different folks. But typically, I guess, what we see, if you are professionally managed, that manager is always a key person in these meetings. And if we're now in a mid-rise or high-rise application, the next individual that's almost always involved would be your lead engineer or building supervisor or maintenance supervisor, someone with a lot of experience about the building as a whole. Lots of times they bring a lot of knowledge around your mechanical systems. Those two individuals are typically pivotal. Then moving over to board members and which board members, I even put that in. We always would welcome the entire board, but I do think the question was the point person. So if I actually back up, it's helpful for that professional manager to be your point person. And if you are self-managed, it's really any of the board members, and probably the board member who's most passionate about this. Just because you're the president or vice president or treasurer or not, that doesn't really qualify or preclude you from being the point person. Really someone who's going to just take it seriously and be a good liaison between your vendors or your consultants and the rest of your board is how you're going to set yourself up for success.
Good, thanks, Andrew. Dan, this is one directed to you. If a board member or homeowner becomes a board member, knows of any issue, and then they decide to ignore that report or that issue, or they reverse the previous board's decision, what liability do they have?
You go back to the limits on the liability. So assuming they didn't, are they personally profiting? Really? No. They're not paying a higher assessment, but they're really not. Is it willful misconduct? They're going to say, no, I thought the last board was stupid and this board's much smarter, and therefore that we got rid of the prior policy. The answer is going to be probably very limited. I mean, if it's clear by any review of the expert reports that the prior board would have obtained that delay is a safety risk for the unit owners, and they're willing to proceed, or the owners, and willing to proceed with, I didn't want to get into technical, but a derivative lawsuit, a suit where a group of unit owners are acting as though they're the board because a court will let them, when the process is, you had notice, you're putting us all at risk, and we're going to act as a board, but normally you need, I'm just going to pick a number, 5% of the unit owners, depends by state. And you need a judge to say, yeah, you can act as the derivative representative and you can proceed. But realistically, it's really hard. Your least expensive, best move, work really hard to get other unit or other owners to vote with you and get a different board in. I hate to say it, but that's going to be your best solution most times.
Great, thanks, Dan. Andrew, if you could touch on different funding methods. There's a comment here about the board having a challenging time kind of understanding the definition of adequately funded. I know we have a lot of Florida people on the call. In Florida, there's two different methods. There's that component method and there's that threshold funding. If we could add some context to those two strategies.
Yeah. So there's that. There's actually a few questions around funding. So the first point that's important to make is this could and will vary by state. So Florida has some language. A lot of states actually have no language on funding levels. And so I'll be a little more generic. But in Florida, and I grew up there, I used to work there. I'm not there anymore, but I believe in the statutes, it uses the phrase adequate funding. And that's not a perfectly defined amount. Because it's not harking back to this other methodology, which is percent funded, which is a very calculated thing. There's certainly pros and cons with how you evaluate funding, but the general belief, and if we sort of think in the Florida statute mindset, is adequate funding in layman's terms would be having enough cash on hand at the right time. So it has nothing to do with, it doesn't tell you how much you need to put away each year related to what you're spending that year, because if you've been on a board for a while, you've probably seen some years you have huge capital expenses and some years you have none. And a funding plan is going to set you up with relatively stable contributions going in. So again, I think the gentleman said your HOA quibbles over the definition. You're not the only one because it isn't precisely defined. It's something, we have a couple articles on it that I'm sure maybe Matt, we could share in our post follow-up just to get more context, because it's hard to answer it really succinctly. And again, everyone needs to remember, depending on what state you're located in, you'd want to be aware of, how your statutes define it, if they do define it, because you certainly want to be in compliance with those.
Great, thank you. Another engineering question or reserve study question: how do you handle road repairs or resurfacing when there's still 10 lots to be built?
Yeah, sure. So, I think where this is going is thinking about, well, we still have construction traffic and they may be affecting the roads. And if that is sort of the intent of the question, that's going to be an operational decision that has to be made. When we say repairs, well, how significant is the damage of those repairs? Where are they in proximity to the lots to still be developed? Certainly you can just hire a paving contractor. They'll come down and put pavement down wherever you tell them to. But, sometimes you may want to bring in a professional to help you make those decisions. There's not going to be a right or wrong. And for communities where we've seen extended build out timelines, certainly repairs are ongoing before the whole community is complete. Because we have some, multi-thousand home HOAs, miles of pavement. So of course, there's still development ongoing when repairs are being performed. You really would want to look at almost regardless of external factors. So in this case, the external factor is development still going on, but regardless of any external factor, if there's a condition that warrants repair, there's usually going to be limited reasons to wait on conducting that repair, right? There are reasons, But typically we want to repair and maintain all of our assets as they need to be. In this case, it may cost us more in the long run because it's still going to be worn accelerated by construction vehicles. But if the deterioration warrants repair, you likely want to do that sooner rather than later.
Great, thank you. We've got quite a few questions here you have to go through, so I'll try to cherry pick. Dan and Andrew, are you guys available for another 10 minutes or so to go through some of these?
Yeah, and I was going to say, Matt, what we can do is for any of you that have put a question in, if you don't hear us answering it, we'll look through these and we can probably put together some level of a FAQ with some answers. And I'm sure Dan will have to be careful because what he puts in writing, but we will try to at least touch on most of these as a follow-up. But yeah, I can stick around for a little bit here.
Okay.
So let me steal one of the questions because I think this is common to lots of places, which is you have a board disagreeing on whether to hire a structural engineer/engineer or whether they just hire the person to fix the problem, which in the question was a brick masonry wall. My generic answer is on walls and roofs and those types of issues, it would be hire the engineer who will develop the specs that the contractor has to follow when you put it out to bid to get the work done correctly, because the natural instinct of a masonry contractor or a roofer or anyone else is to say, yes, the problem's a roof problem. Why? Because I do roofing work and therefore I'll solve the problem. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I simply mean they think they have the ability, but they don't see the whole issue necessarily. That doesn't mean there's not some great contractors out there who actually can see the whole issue. But I personally, where I'm the president of the association, would say, let's get an engineering report. Let's find out what the problem really is, and let's fix the real problem the first time.
Great, thanks, Dan. Another question regarding disclosure of the reserve study to potential buyers. Is that required in the state of Wisconsin?
What, is there a requirement to hand out the reserve study? Technically, maybe not. Realistically, probably if it discloses any defect of any kind, because you're required to disclose a whole bunch of different defect levels based on your mandatory disclosures that you have to make under the statute. So I would never keep it. I would never honestly keep any document because it's not worth it. It's just not worth the headache. Whatever I have, I would just say, here it is. Other than obviously attorney-client privileged communications, if you happen to have those.
Perfect. Andrew, we're going to circle back to you on a funding question. What exactly do you mean by fully funded?
So
how do you maybe define that? Because I know there's two different definitions as far as funding what the reserve provider recommends and then versus being 100% funded.
Yeah, so 100% funded or fully funded is, again, there's a pretty basic formula to determine it, but you can understand that as you have in the bank the value of the depreciation of all of your assets. So a very simplistic example, if you had one element that's $100,000 element and it lasts 10 years, at the end of your first year, if you have 10,000 in the bank, you're 100% funded. At the end of year two, if you have 20,000 in the bank, you're 100% funded, right? Because you're depreciating or using up lifespan of it. So that's what 100% funding, which typically, generally when people say fully funded, that's what they're thinking of. And so we would actually, if you see a reserve study, many providers include one or both methods. So that's the percent funded method. The other is going to be a cash flow or threshold analysis. So if you see a study from us, you're primarily going to see that threshold analysis. And that's where we talk more about, we use language of adequate reserves. It's called threshold funding because, again, we make sure your balance is always at a good amount, but it's not a certain percentage of depreciation, but it ensures, because it's over a 30-year time frame, it ensures you have the right funds on hand at the right time.
Great, thank you. Dan, I'm going to direct one towards you here. I'm going to generalize it more, so not being specific to a specific component, but this association has a common element that is leaning. It's an exterior wall, retaining wall, and the board wants to get a structural engineer. There's a general contractor in the community, and they're saying a structural engineer isn't necessary. How should the board approach that situation?
And my answer on engineers, not engineers, is absent it being 100% clear why the problem exists, because I'm going to guess if you're having a retaining wall leaning, whatever the issue is, if you're not 100% sure that whatever it is you're going to pay this contractor to do is going to solve the problem. I mean, a broken window is easy. I have a broken window, fix the window. That's an easy example of the one side because they replaced the window. On the other hand, if I have a leak around the window, that means that's where the water's coming in. That's not necessarily where the problem is. Then I would hire an engineer. So I just think, even though people understand that engineers come at a cost and the cost is expensive, fixing things right the first time has a lot of value to your association, especially 10 years down the road. The first time you go, well, now we got other problems. So have the engineer look at a lot of problems all at once and take advantage of some economies of scale.
Very good. Thank you.
Matt, I'm going to actually grab a couple here because I think there's some interesting questions being asked to sort of get these to the front. One that actually just came in a few minutes ago, it asks, is there an adequate amount of reserves to have compared to the value of the community that's 35 years old? And I've actually started to have more conversations around this. You know, we have a lot of townhomes that were developed. I'm in Texas now, and I've had this conversation in Houston actually quite a bit. On the west side, there's a lot of townhomes from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And those boards sometimes are in a challenging position because they're realizing you have dated infrastructure and your community is costing you more and more to maintain. And so the answer is maybe not the answer a board would want to hear, but when we talk about adequate reserves, that's being balanced against what are your assets, where are they in their lifespan? So what I think the gentleman's sort of getting at is it's costing a lot, and are we even worth this much? And it is a challenging position to start to get into when you have really dated communities. But again, we're not, no reserve study provider and no reserve study is really concerned with what your value of your property is. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean that we are assessing what you have and what it costs to maintain that. So if you have roofs and facades and pavement, if you have a central boiler, whatever you have to be maintaining that regardless of if you were brand new or 35 or 50 years old. And so once you've received a reserve study, you see what the cost of that is. And then, yes, unfortunately, you as a board may be a little concerned saying, are we even worth this much? But the reality is that's what it's going to cost to maintain the assets you have. And then a second one, just related, sometimes a reserve study may have bad news. And so the question earlier on today was ideas on what to say to get the board to read the reserve study. So if I had figured that out, we'd have a lot more clients probably because people would actually be reading the product that we give them. So it is hard to get a board and then even your homeowners invested. And what I've found the best trick or tip is I don't try to convince a board to read the entire 60 pages. It's here's the reserve study. After it's been issued, a short phone call with the board and your reserve study, the reserve specialists who conducted it, and really working through the high level overview. So, right, that executive summary, looking at your expenditure plan, talking about the major things on there, because there may be 40 line items or 40 components. Typically 4 to 6 of those would be major drivers in your funding. Talk around that. And then the rest of the report is always supporting. Like when you have questions, dig deeper, but I don't even think a board should feel they should know it inside and out. And that same trick has worked for boards who want to engage their homeowners, sending out that executive summary, high level, couple pages. When that lands in someone's inbox, maybe they'll read that again, as opposed to that 60-page report. And so that engagement can likely go up. And when you have engaged residents and boards, it's going to be easier. Dan made an outstanding point. I actually wrote it down because I don't want to butcher it, but he said, I didn't write down verbatim, but he talked about bringing in the expert to explain it. So this goes far beyond a reserve study, but even starting at the reserve study, having that reserve specialist explain it to your board, your membership. I was at a meeting this week doing this because they're going to see some huge increases. And typically homeowners just think the board is doing whatever the board wants to do, forgetting that they're homeowners too. They're going to have to pay these assessments. But by having us there to explain the why behind it, no one likes dues going up, but when it's explained, I think that's really helpful. You may still not like it, but at least they're hearing it, and they're hearing it not from the board, but from third parties. And so I think that's also a good way to get engagement.
Great, thank you. Dan, one question, I believe you answered it in the chat earlier, as well as how maybe you could cover it with the entire audience, is how to obtain as-built documents when everyone claims to not have them.
So let me give you my basic theory on associations, and this is sort of going to be overriding. The developers build associations to make money, period. And therefore, their concern is not necessarily the safety or the long-term maintenance, repair, and replacement of your association various parts. Maintaining an as-built drawing takes time and money. It's a cost item that, at least my experience in Wisconsin and a couple other states, is most associations don't have unless your state legislature requires it, because the developer won't spend the time or the money to create the as-built. Therefore, what you have is contractors writing on their individual drawings and making whatever changes get approved by the engineer on the particular project, or whoever the design professional is, to do certain changes, and those never get accumulated. So all you have is a whole bunch of different sets of alleged final drawings with handwriting on them that are prepared by all of the various contractors. So theoretically, if you get into a lawsuit, yes, you could subpoena all of their records and put together their last set of drawings with all of their markings on it. Hopefully somebody kept them. And those are presumably very close to what was actually built, but I would bet not. So my answer is you're likely not going to get them absent a law requiring them to exist, but you might want to consider pushing for a law to require them to exist, because they should. There's two things that help you. One, as-built drawings, and two, a list of all the contractors and subcontractors. So when something does go wrong, you can at least call them and say, hey, can you come fix X, Y, or Z? Or do you have a warranty on X, Y, or Z? Because they might.
Good, thank you. We're running short on time here, so I want to grab one more question maybe for each of you. And then what we'll do is we'll review what questions were not answered, make sure that we get those to both Andrew and Dan, or if we have other collateral assets that speak to that question, we'll certainly share that with you all as well. So Dan, one question for you, and then I'll close out with you, Andrew, is could you speak to the value of having D&O insurance and how to obtain it?
So in most states, this is my belief. I certainly know about Wisconsin. I know about a couple of others. You have D&O insurance generically that comes with your general liability insurance policy. It is what add-on insurances generically are not that good. That's the easiest way I can say this. If you want to have good D&O insurance, which, by the way, if you're a board member, an officer, director, the association should buy for you a separate D&O policy, and they should pay for you to be, and this is just a member of some group that educates people on how to be better board members and better officers and directors. And that may be CAI, it may be some other group. I don't know enough of the groups out there. Those are the two things you literally can do for board members, and they both help the association. The first one, the D&O, lets each of the board members protect themselves as long as they're acting in good faith. Okay, act in good faith and get the protection you should get because it makes sense. Second one is self-explanatory. A better educated board member is just a better board member.
Good, thank you. Andrew, one last one here for you. Maybe instead of a question, we could comment on what we're seeing or hearing in the marketplace about post-serve side about mandating reserves.
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of talk throughout the majority of the states with new legislation, at least being discussed, and task force being developed. And certainly the belief is we're going to see some of that legislation probably in Florida before other states follow suit, just because of the closeness of the issue. And I've mentioned in passing, I'm over here in Texas, nothing has come through yet in Texas. And again, Florida, there's been a lot of formal task force put together. There have been some local municipalities that have updated some of their 40-year certifications, or they've created it, because that was actually only in 2 counties prior, I think. Don't quote me if I'm wrong on that. So I think we're going to see more. And the general sort of push is some level of requirement for reserve studies at some frequency, making sure those are performed by the right individuals. And of course, different states are going to write that in or codify that in different ways of what's the right individual. Some are even thinking of then requiring that funding to be followed. So that's actually a very interesting thing to think about. And then moving beyond, as sort of Dan laid out, that reserve study is that starting point where we believe we'll see some legislation, vary by state as well, but that gets into that next step of actual structural analysis. Again, for those of you not in Florida, if you haven't been reading about, the 40-year recertification is what buildings had to do in a couple of counties. That may be coming down to 30 years or maybe even sooner, maybe every 10 years. But those recertifications have always been performed by engineers in the structural, electrical trades. And so that probably will start to be codified in various states at some required frequency. Again, the whole purpose is to catch things before they turn into a tragedy like Surfside. But there's also a lot. Actually, I was reading last night, I didn't get through it, but in Florida, the grand jury report came out, about 40 pages on their findings, and they reference a couple of the other task force that were developed. And I wish I had actually pulled this out so I could give a more accurate number, but the number of buildings that are in this, I think the division in Miami-Dade is like the unsafe buildings division or something. I mean, there's a couple thousand buildings that are in that category. Doesn't mean they're going to be condemned, but you start to see the amount of aging structures. So certainly we'll see legislation. The question is how quickly, how widespread throughout the United States, what states are first to it and last to it. But there's enough talk at that level that we are going to see some things come through eventually.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Dan, for your time. That does conclude today's webinar. As mentioned earlier, this is recorded. We'll get an email of the recording out to all registrants later this afternoon. We'll make sure that we provide some content or additional context or a follow-up call to those questions that we were unable to get to. Thank you all for your time. We hope you have a great afternoon and a wonderful weekend.
Thanks everyone for attending.